Hello, party people, and welcome to the final episode of Season 7 of Law and Candor, the podcast wholly devoted to pursuing the legal technology revolution. I am Bill, and as always, I am here with my co-host, Rob. Thrilled to have you, as always, for this last episode. We're going to continue with the theme of this entire season, which is a celebration of Women's History Month. But before we do that, we're going to do the portion of our program that you and I both love.
Sightings of Radical Brilliance.
This is where we bring to you the latest of newsworthy innovation and acts of sheer genius happening in the world of legal technology. For our last episode, we wanted to discuss tech M&A. Yet we found an article in Bloomberg Law that talked about this specifically. And it's interesting because this time last year, there was so much uncertainty in the market, and it really is a tale of two halves, Rob. The first half of the year affected by COVID, and the second half of the year where we saw a lot of M&A pickup.
You know, it's crazy, Bill. Like, for much of our career, we've both been kind of tied to M&A activity and the resulting legal work that comes from that, especially on the antitrust side. And I think for everyone, it was just, it was a real scary first half of 2020 when the deal flow just suddenly stopped or very, very drastically slowed down. You know, we've heard the phrase, you know, uncertainty kills deals. And that was certainly the case. Everybody kind of took a pause, and there was just a lot of questions about when was that going to bounce back?
It's really amazing how much COVID affected every day. I mean, I found myself several points during the year last year just thinking about how the whole entire world is going through this, not just individuals, not just the pain and suffering caused at the individual level, the family level, but, you know, businesses grinding to a halt, entire economies grinding to a halt. And what makes economies grind to a halt? Things like this, deals getting stopped. Now, obviously, it's not the biggest deal when you put all things, when people's health and everything like that. But when you look at it in context, it's amazing that the entire world was dealing with this. I know we had a few deals that we were working on the second request side that literally stopped right before they were about to pull and refile. But then, you know, again, second half of the year, more certainty started coming out. People started realizing what this pandemic was going to look like, how it was going to affect business, how it was going to affect stock prices. And a lot of those same deals that we were involved in ended up going through in the second half of the year. And some of the deals that were scheduled for the second half of the year went on as scheduled. And what we ended up having was a strong second half in M&A activity. And it looks like 2021 is lining up to be a really big year.
And I think we were even lucky, you know, like if you think about, you know, as we got into the second half of 2020, you know, there was still a lot of uncertainty about COVID and, you know, how quickly vaccines would get deployed and rolled out. But even with that, you know, to see the deal flow pick back up and finish the year strong, I think it's just a great indication of how things will go in 2021. And we're lucky to see it.
Yeah, I think, you know, business is learning to operate with a 90% work from home workforce, you know, 80-20 working from home. I think they started to realize business can continue. And once they realized that, these deals got back on track. So it's an interesting article. Give it a read. It's on Bloomberg Law, touches on something we all experience in some way or another. Megan Tribe authored it. Really good article. Just touches on it briefly, but I think it gives you a good idea of how the M&A market took its hits in the first half of 2020 because of COVID-19, but it looks like it's back on track. And in a lot of ways, we're expecting more M&A than ever before.
Well, and Bill, it would make sense that we talk about this as our sighting of radical brilliance, because today our guest speaker segment really ties into this. We're going to be talking about recent antitrust changes and, you know, maybe what we can expect from the administration and from the rest of the year. And we are excited to introduce Kristin Sanford of Weil, who's going to walk us through these things. And should be a great episode. We are here today with Kristin Sanford from Weil to talk about what we can expect in the antitrust world with a new administration and lots of other interesting things. But before we kick off with that, Kristin, could you just share a little bit about yourself and, you know, as we mentioned before, maybe give a little bit of, you know, how did you end up as an attorney in the antitrust group at Weil?
Sure. Well, I think most people don't go into law school knowing that they want to practice antitrust law, but I actually did. Before law school, so in between undergrad and law school, I worked for an airline. And airlines have had all sorts of antitrust issues. While I was there, we went through 2 joint business agreements, so went through the regulatory process of antitrust, but also had some really interesting litigation with a distribution company And it was just really interesting watching that play out from the business side, and then just seeing how the legal department and the outside firm stepped in and really helped us with that situation. And it's funny, also the outside, one of the main firms involved happened to be Weil. And so it's been exciting to see that come full circle now, with now being an antitrust attorney at Weil.
Usually it's a story where somebody is a first or second year associate, they're in litigation somewhere, and an antitrust partner says, I just got a second request, you're working for me for the next 6 months. And that's how you get involved in antitrust law. The fact that you had this scoped out from before law school is amazing. I mean, that's why we ask those questions though. How'd you end up here? Because everyone's got a different story. We have yet to hear the same story about either how you got into e-discovery, how you got into antitrust. Everyone gets to where they are in such a unique way. Thanks for sharing. So let's jump into this. I love talking about this. I know Rob loves talking about it because he, back in the days that he likes to forget, he actually worked in an antitrust department of a big law firm. So he's still going through PTSD, as I'm sure you can understand. So, but what are some of the impacts around a new administration? So, we see this every 4 years or, sometimes 8. When a new administration comes in, there are changes that are expected, and sometimes you're given a heads up, right? We know this is coming with this administration and we need to adapt accordingly. What are you seeing? What are you expecting over the next 4 years?
Yeah, you're right. Anytime there's an administration change, we see this flurry of questions and speculation about what's going to change, what's going to shift. And then ultimately, for better or worse, not a lot changes in the antitrust world usually. So we're in a similar state right now, but maybe it'll be a little different this time. There's, of course, the change of the guard going on at FTC and DOJ antitrust division, and that's still ongoing, and we're still going to have to see where that lands. But there has been a proposal put out there. In February, Senator Klobuchar introduced new legislation to potentially strengthen the antitrust laws. And that's interesting because her bill, as proposed, would actually force merging parties to prove that certain deals would not harm competition. So that's a reversal of the way it currently works, which is that right now the government is the party that bears the burden of proving that a deal challenged in court wouldn't hurt competition. So there's that one solid proposal out there. But then there's just generally a lot of rhetoric going on right now about just big is bad. And maybe that leads to more emphasis on market share alone and less emphasis on demonstrable competitive effects of a deal or of conduct. But antitrust is really just front and center right now, especially when it comes to big tech. And so I was so surprised and delighted to hear. I was driving and listening to 93.9, which is a hip hop station here in the
This is when you're not listening to the podcast, I'm assuming.
When I'm not listening to the podcast,
okay.
I occasionally listen to 93.
Typically, you're only listening to this podcast, but you happen to be listening to that. Okay, just want to make sure.
Exactly, just for a quick break from the podcast. And they were talking about the recent FTC suit against Facebook. And I just couldn't believe I'm listening to 93.9 hearing about this Facebook lawsuit. So it's not just Facebook, but big tech generally is in the hot seat right now. So, and this started with before this new Biden administration. Things were at least heating up more in the Trump administration. The FTC suit against Facebook was in December of 2020. And that wasn't just the federal government. That's also most of the states are involved in this too. And then in October, there's the DOJ suit against Google. I'd say around February 2019, the FTC created a technology enforcement division to monitor these tech companies. And of course, this is a division responsible for the Facebook lawsuit. As recently as the start of this year, DOJ sued to block Visa's proposed acquisition of Plaid, which was a fintech startup, and they ended up abandoning the deal. So there's just, the tech companies are really in the hot seat right now. And I definitely, all signs point to the idea that that's going to continue, if not heat up a little bit more with the Biden administration. So the White House recently brought on Tim Wu as a technology and competition advisor to President Biden as part of his National Economic Council. Wu has been a really outspoken critic of big tech companies and past antitrust enforcement trends. So, that certainly indicates that it's going to be an ongoing focus for the administration. And then as recently as today, we're hearing that Lena Khan would be named as an FTC commissioner. And she's written a lot and been pretty outspoken about antitrust enforcement of big tech. So definitely going to be an industry to watch going forward.
For sure. And it's interesting. Another thing, like when you think about these shifts, outside of tech, and we totally agree that it does seem like there's going to be a lot of emphasis on that. What other changes do you see, whether it's, different industries or different areas of focus for the agencies?
Yeah, so many potential changes. There's been just a lot of, typically antitrust analysis, whether you're talking about deals or litigation, what have you, is supposed to be a value neutral, economics driven type of analysis, whether it is or isn't, I don't know. But now you're hearing a lot more about throwing in other issues into the analysis. So, for example, Commissioner Slaughter recently made comments about using antitrust to deal with systemic racism. I've never heard about that or such a proposal, but it's really interesting and be interesting to watch and see where that goes. Other things to get, piled onto the antitrust analysis: data use, privacy. And one really hot topic right now is also labor markets. So considering wages and compensation and just, how things impact actual employees as part of antitrust analysis. So that's definitely something worth talking about for me because, one, it's a hot topic, but also my dad spent his career as an HR leader. So this will definitely solidify my position as his favorite child, to touch on that a little bit.
I love the shout out to dad to get to get a little favoritism in the family. I love it.
Exactly.
Plus, if it gets us one more listener.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. My mom too. But so again, this isn't something that's new under the Biden administration. The DOJ and FTC put out guidance to HR professionals back in 2016, and the guidance focused on wage fixing and no poach. So that's been in place for a while, but years went by, and there was talk about maybe going after some of this type of conduct criminally, but years have passed and we didn't see a criminal case there until just recently, just this past January. DOJ brought criminal charges against an outpatient medical facility where they said that the parties involved entered into a gentleman's agreement between at least two different companies agreeing not to poach each other's senior level employees. And the indictment cites numerous emails between HR representatives and executives of the outpatient medical facilities, just, talking about who should or should not be recruited or hired. So outside of wage fixing and no poach, there's also been a lot of focus lately on non-compete clauses. And again, this isn't just federal. This is also, there's been a lot of interest among the states too. So HR issues, another place to watch.
So let's talk about how these changes actually impact how you, as counsel to some of these major corporations, what kind of advice would you give them on how to manage these? Generally speaking, whether it's the changes or even without the changes, the consistency, that what they can expect when they get hit with a second request, for instance, on some of this stuff.
Yeah, so we just have to continually remind our clients that antitrust enforcement is a priority for regulators, and not just in the U.S., but worldwide. And on the merger side, that means managing expectations on timeline. So these deals could end up going through really prolonged investigations. There's probably a lot more uncertainty going forward about agencies trying out novel theories that they haven't before. So antitrust just really has to be a focus of compliance overall. And then also for deals, document creation is so important in any aspect of antitrust. And, it's really not sufficient to start thinking about it at the start of a deal or at the start of a litigation. It's all about what's already in those existing documents. So ongoing training is really important there. And this goes hand in hand with e-discovery. You do these big second request reviews or subpoenas, and you find a document that you just think, oh, if this goes there, this will be exhibit 1, So document creation is just really important. And it's not just emails, it's presentations, text messages, Skype link or other IM chat type of messages. And it's, the point is not to not be accurate in what you write. The point is to make sure that you try to remove the ambiguity and that things are written in such a way that they can't be misconstrued as having an anti-competitive meaning.
And there's so many challenges with this, Kristin, especially with the amount of documents that get turned over and reviewed in a case like that. What recommendations do you have for people that are trying to manage their risk and in the face of all these challenges?
Yeah, it starts well before you get to the point of e-discovery. It's got to be like a culture of compliance within the organization and understanding about document creations and a real understanding about documents never ever going away. And they can always turn up later. Writing with clarity, knowing that these documents could be turned over to the government and could be potentially misconstrued. And then just understanding that as far as on the attorney side, you're doing your hot doc reviews and you need to know what you're looking for. And it sometimes goes well beyond, if it's a deal, it goes beyond the deal, because a lot of these other investigations often get started because of documents that turned up on a deal and then lead to a completely separate investigation.
Kristin, this has been great. I love this discussion. We could talk about this all day. Rob and I have worked on a number of second requests throughout our careers. We're taking an interest in antitrust. I told you he used to be on your side of the equation when he was an associate on a big law firm dealing with antitrust. And so I love this. I love the topic. I think our listeners will love the topic. We're not going to let you go yet, though. We've added a question because this season is completely and totally dedicated to Women's History Month. And we're asking all of our guest speakers this question and love to get your take on it. So what advice would you give other women in the antitrust industry that are looking to move their career forward? Not everyone knew they wanted to be an antitrust attorney from the time they were born like you did, but there are, you whether they get pulled into it from a partner, and like I was saying earlier in that example where an antitrust partner pulls someone from litigation and like, you're working for me now, or they start to take an interest in it because as a summer associate or maybe a first year, they played a little part in a bunch of different things and they really got into antitrust. They really started to take a liking to it. What advice would you give them? And I guess I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here too. Do you find that when there's a first or a second year woman that is looking to get into antitrust and they come to you and ask you for your advice, do you feel like a kinship? Do you feel a responsibility almost to serve as a mentor or at least provide advice? It's just we've been getting into that a little bit more because we feel like, again, legal has been a traditionally all boys world for years and years and years. And that has really started to change a lot. And we're starting to see women really take prominent positions of power across the spectrum, whether it's on the e-discovery side, in the law firm side, and, in-house. And it's really interesting to see not only what their take is on it, but how they help foster the next generation.
Yeah. Well, starting with your second question, I've always been inclined to reach out to other women, other attorneys like that. And now more than ever, because with COVID, it's been women dropping out of the workforce disproportionately. So I think it's very important, whether there's just all sorts of COVID related challenges, work from home related challenges that have led to that. So absolutely, now more than ever, I'm very interested in reaching out to other women. And then with respect to your bigger question, I would say, just give antitrust a try because it's such a great practice area. It's such a hybrid practice area where we are transactional attorneys. We work on deals. That's primarily what I do. We're litigators. We're regulatory attorneys. There's absolutely something. And then there's also the criminal side. If you get into the cartel side of antitrust, there's absolutely something for everyone. So I would say, just give it a try. And, for women who feel like they want a practice area that's maybe has a little bit, just maybe more women than others. If there may be not as many women on the transactional side, then, maybe go for the litigation side. So there's just a lot of flexibility within antitrust to find something that suits you. Or maybe you go about it by just finding a mentor and doing whatever they do. That's not a bad approach either.
Kristin, this has been an amazing episode and really, really appreciate your willingness to be on here. And maybe just to sum up a little bit, I think point number one, Kristin knew what she wanted to do with her life before anyone else on this podcast. So that's admirable. Second, tech companies for sure will be in the hot seat in this coming administration and probably in the coming years from an antitrust standpoint. I thought it was really interesting, that discussion around the extension of antitrust enforcement to things like systemic racism or HR type issues, and just that flexibility that we're seeing there. Also, if you're out there and you're looking for great advice on how to protect yourself, create a culture of compliance, be mindful of the documents and the things that you're creating. And finally, I think your advice to other women in the industry was great. And again, just want to thank you for taking your time and being willing to be on the podcast. You've been a great guest.
Thanks, Kristin. It was great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on season 7. Season 7, can you believe it? Listen, they may or may not have us back for season 8. And the only thing that's going to dictate whether or not we come back for season 8 is if you like, subscribe, recommend, have them like and subscribe. Please be sure to check it out anywhere where you get podcasts. We really appreciate the support, and see you at season 8.